All right, we're just having a kibitz up here. Some of us just came back from vacation, trying to get back in gear. It's my pleasure to call to order the 107th meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission at the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center. We really have only two things on our agenda, or really one, just making decisions about live entertainment venues and surrounding communities. And with that, I'm going to pass the leadership of the meeting to Ombudsman John Ziemba.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Today, the Commission is deciding on petitions for surrounding community status for Northampton, Hamden, and Long Meadow. As you know, the Commission heard from representatives from MGM and the communities on January 28th. The materials in the Commissioners' packets supplement and organize the materials from that meeting, including the very detailed surrounding community petitions and petition responses from the applicants. All of those materials are on the Commission's website, and I urge anyone who wants to follow further to take a look in the archives on those meetings. Today, we will discuss 6 separate criteria used in the Commission regulations to help the Commission determine surrounding community status: proximity, transportation infrastructure, development impacts, operational impacts, other impacts, and positive impacts. The petitions, the applicant responses, and the staff and consultant reviews found in the packet demonstrate that different criteria are more integral to the determination of surrounding community status for each community. We will focus much of this discussion today on such areas. Today we are joined by our team of consultants who helped us review these criteria, including City Point Partners, Green International Affiliates, McFarland Johnson on traffic, construction, water and wastewater issues, HLT Advisory on economic issues, LDS Consulting on housing and school impacts, and our own Mark Vanderlinden, Director of Research and Problem Gaming, on issues such as problem gaming, crime, and other operational impacts. I will ask different consultants to help in the review for different communities. At the conclusion of the presentation on each community, the Commission will deliberate surrounding community status and will make a decision on each. In addition, today there is also an involuntary disbursements petition relative to the Northampton application for surrounding community status. So after we review the Northampton filings, then we can then turn to involuntary disbursement petition. With that, I ask you to turn to page 3 of the Northampton petition. We will go Northampton, Hamden, and then we will finish with Long Meadow today. So page 3 of the Northampton analysis. I first note in the framework, the legal framework that accompanies geographic proximity, pursuant to MGL Chapter 23K, in order for a community to be a surrounding community, it must be in proximity to a host community. The statute, that is a prerequisite for the statute. There are different types of impacts that don't necessarily, are not necessarily required for a community to become a surrounding community, such as a specific operational type of impact, but geographic proximity is a statutory requirement. Northampton argues that it is proximate, taking into account that individuals in Western Mass are accustomed to driving long distances, and that it is approximately a 20-minute drive to the site of the proposed facility. MGM argues that Northampton is approximately 18 miles from the project site, with a drive time of approximately 20 to 30 minutes. As such, the project is outside any reasonable interpretation of the term proximity, according to MGM. Moving on to transportation impacts, Northampton's petition states, let me just read the specific quote for you. Unlike many other communities throughout the Commonwealth that have petitioned for surrounding community status, Northampton does not claim to be burdened by impacts on its infrastructure, e.g. traffic impacts. Unfortunately, the city instead anticipates a grave and substantial impact on its finances and local businesses due to the erosion of its status as the sole destination market in the Pioneer Valley, which forms the core and fabric of Northampton's economy. In regard to the lack of transportation impacts, MGM agrees with this analysis, and our traffic consultants also concur with that analysis. Their memo is included in your packet, but due to the fact that it was not raised by Northampton, we'll dispense with them providing a further presentation as part of the Northampton analysis. Also of note, Northampton was not involved in the PVPC's regional traffic study, and they were not any significant of a mention in the environmental notification form documents, draft environmental impact report documents that were recently issued. So moving on to impacts that Northampton may experience from the development of the gaming facility. Northampton on page 31 of your packet.
John, can I go back to the previous comment that they were not part of the PVPC study? Was that because it wasn't deemed to be close enough to be worthy of the analysis, or the city declined?
No, that's correct. There was a determination of a number of communities that were very sort of geographically proximate, and those were part of that analysis based on the likelihood of traffic impacts.
Thank you.
So moving on to development impacts, page 31 of your packet. Northampton similarly does not claim development impacts. Again, our traffic consultant concurs with this analysis. And development impacts, by what we mean is impacts during the construction of the facility, and typically these would be increased truck traffic on local roadways or other impacts from the construction in a very within a very close proximate distance to the proposed facility. So at page, now I'd like you to turn to page 36 of the Northampton analysis. This is the operation question. As the commission heard on the 28th, and upon review of the Northampton application, Northampton is stating impact based on the economic impact that Northampton believes it will experience as a result of the new MGM facility that is proposed. We're joined by Lyle Hall from HLT Advisory, and he will explain the arguments and will give the commission the benefit of its analysis based on these arguments. So I'll now turn to Mr. Hall.
Thanks, John. Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. As John mentioned, we were engaged by the Commission to look at the operational impacts of potential casino in Springfield on Northampton, specifically focusing on the local retail, entertainment, and service businesses in Northampton. What we did to focus on that area was to review a substantial amount of background material that was put together by both the petitioner and MGM, as well as looking at examples of similar casino situations that had occurred in small communities proximate to larger metropolitan areas in which a casino was developed. We also reviewed a report that was prepared for the City of Northampton by Comoe & Associates, a Massachusetts-based economic impact company. And that was the city's primary basis for submitting their petition, and it's the area I'd like to spend most of the time on this morning, and I'll just quickly touch on a few points. I should mention right off the top that Comoe & Associates' objectives as set out in the scope of work submitted as part of the involuntary payment application. The scope was only to look at the adverse negative impacts on the city, not to consider the positive impacts. And I quote from the statement of work that says, "The city would like the consultant to assess these issues and provide an expert report that will show the extent of any adverse economic impacts on the community." One of the points I'll raise is the fact that the positive outcomes of the casino were not assessed and therefore not quantified. So I'm not suggesting that's a shortfall of the Comoe report. It was a shortfall of the objectives that were put on the table. There are three issues, though, I'd like to address with respect to what Comoe said. One is a failure to consider the repatriation of gaming revenue by Massachusetts residents, which is currently estimated by the UMass Dartmouth at about $710 million a year, the majority of that going to casinos in Rhode Island and Connecticut. If we simply do some simple math here and look at the population, adult population of Massachusetts at just under 5 million, 4.77 million, and that would provide, based on a $700 million spend on out-of-state gaming, an average spend per adult of about $149. So taking that and applying it to the trade area that Kamoman suggested, about 323,000 people, it suggests that up to $50 million in gaming spend could be repatriated just to the trade area that we're speaking of. And that, of course, would not include any costs that went along with that for gamblers going to Connecticut or Rhode Island on travel, if they stayed overnight, on meals, food and beverage, and gas.
Could you just walk me through the analysis one more time? How'd you come up with $149?
Sure, just by taking the UMass estimate of out-of-state gaming by Massachusetts residents of 700 million.
That's gaming and non-gaming? Or
That's gaming,
That's just gaming?
just gaming.
Okay. Of which 80 or so percent is returned to gamblers, right? That's not,
No, that would be the net.
that's gross game, you're talking about gross gaming?
Gross gaming revenue.
710 gross gaming revenue.
To put it in the customer's point of view, the amount of money they left out of the state
Right,
in
okay.
casinos, on gaming only.
Okay.
And then simply dividing that by the adult
Okay,
population
I
to
got
get an
that.
average.
So the 710 million is gross gaming revenue. So to generate that number, there's something like 4 billion had to be gambled, right? Wow. Okay.
Okay.
But just to follow up on that, how does the repatriation of that help anybody but the casino? I can understand the collateral economic yield from keeping the people at home, but the money staying home is, by definition, money that would have gone into the pocket of some other casino and now is going into the pocket of the casino
And the tax, and us.
and us, right?
This is true, and the second point, and where Kamoa went next, is an assumption that every dollar spent on gaming is a dollar not spent on something else. And the point here is that some $50 million is already being spent on gaming. If it's now spent in Massachusetts, there's no reason to believe that those dollars now being spent in Massachusetts would cause a decline in non-gaming spending in Northampton. In fact, if anything, you're now putting more money back in the hands of the residents of that trade area.
Right. Got it.
So those 2 points, repatriation of gaming
Right.
and the incrementality of spending,
Right.
substantially overestimated the impact, we believe, that on Northampton. The third point is that, as I mentioned at the top, is Kamoan did not look at any of the positive benefits from casino operating in that broader trade area, whether that's the 2,300 FTEs that MGM has claimed that they will engage, or the 4 million out-of-state visits to the casino, which would come in from all directions, presumably some of those through Northampton. We wanted to give a bit of a perspective, though, on how this might compare to where similar casinos have happened somewhere else. And you've got our report in front of you, and on page 7, we identify a number of comparables where we looked at casinos of a similar size to what MGM is proposing in Springfield that have occurred in smaller communities outside of major population areas. And the two that we identified as being...
Excuse me, that's page 63 in your packet.
Oh, I'm sorry. The two that we identified as being most relevant are the Parks Casino in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and the Maryland Live outside of Annapolis. Both of these casinos are substantially larger than what's proposed in Springfield, but both could potentially have the impact on these two surrounding communities, whether it's New Hope or Annapolis. We contacted the economic development representatives in both of those communities, told them straight up what we were doing, and asked them to comment on the impact that the casino has had on their community. Now, recognizing that Parks opened in 2009 and Maryland Live in 2012, so relatively recently. But the comments we got back were that there was limited impact, that their belief was that the casino clientele was a very different clientele that frequented those communities for the arts and culture benefits and related amenities that they offered. That there had been no studies done or any requested on the impact of the casino on those communities, and that in their view, the distance, which is comparable to the distance that Northampton is from Springfield, suggested that there would be no impact. The conclusion that we have is that taking into account the overestimation of the negative impacts by Camoan and the lack of consideration of positive impacts, that there is unlikely to be any significant impact on the local retail, entertainment, and service businesses in Northampton. Then we would suggest that that would continue on to the extent relevant to the other communities in the trade area, notably Longmeadow and Hampton. Mr. Ombudsman, that's my report.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, Northampton did not raise impacts on housing or school age impacts. However, we reviewed the potential impacts across the 3 petitioning communities. I'm going to ask Lynn Sweet from LDS Consulting to now brief the Commission on her review for all 3. And unless requested by the Commission, we will not repeat this overview for Hamden or Longmeadow unless there are specific questions. Longmeadow is a little bit more proximate, but I think Lynn is going to address that issue in her remarks. But Lynn, thank you very much.
Thank you. The first thing I want to point out is that
Pull
the
up the mic,
facility is
Lynn.
being,
Pull up the mic closer if you can.
the property is being built in an urban area, and for that reason, we looked at vacancy rates for housing units as well as unemployment statistics. The petition stated that there were going to be 3,254 jobs created, and that within Springfield, they were hoping to employ 35% of their workers from Springfield alone, and that no more than 10% of the workforce would be residents from surrounding communities. So we read the petitions and the exhibits to the petitions, the applications, the gaming legislation, and we looked at census data, which is currently ACS, American Community Survey, is done on a yearly basis rather than the 10-year decennial census. And we ran some Esri reports, which is a company that basically takes census data and assembles it to make it easier to understand, and also does some estimating and projecting. And so the results of our work with regard specifically to the unemployment is that there are approximately 15,000 unemployed workers in Springfield and surrounding communities, with the largest portion actually being in Springfield. So many times more people seeking jobs than the new jobs that would be created. And in addition, we did the same. We looked at housing vacancy and came up with over 11,000 vacant housing units. So it was very hard for us to conclude anything other than that the casino would actually have a positive benefit to fill vacant units as well as to employ unemployed workers. And again, a lot of it has to do kind of with the density of it being an urban area, and the petitioners are more suburban communities that don't have the same access to services and infrastructure as where the facility is going to be placed. With regard to school-age children, there was one petition in Longmeadow that stated a need for a code compliance person of 25 hours a week. And so what we did there was we looked at mainly what they had been spending for what their revenue was for real estate taxes and for licenses and permits, so fees that would be coming in that would cover the cost of a staff member. And we saw that license revenue was going up and taxes were going up, and there really was no explanation as to why they thought there might be the need for another staff member. And so it was hard for us to conclude that the fact that you're going to be building a casino and there may be staff would somehow impact their inspectional services budget in some way. I think, that it would be kind of organic and natural growth, that as you build a home, you get taxes and you get, permit fees, but since there are a lot of vacant units, it really would just be occupying vacant units and maybe rehab permits and so on and so forth. We looked at school-aged children and housing size to see if there might be some type of impact on the expenses to the community for supporting school-aged children. And when we looked at school-aged children, we saw, much like you're seeing elsewhere in the country, the school-age population is actually shrinking because household size is shrinking. And so if you look at that, you can assume that if you're having less children, that you may have more capacity if indeed other children do come into the system. And so we also, we concluded that based on a shrinking household size and contracting school-age population, that it is reasonable to conclude that the Category 1 casino will not adversely impact the schools in the petition communities.
Questions?
I want to go to something that you mentioned at the very early part of your remarks, Ms. Reed. And you said that no more than 10% of the employment would come from surrounding communities. Was that an opinion or statement from the petitioner? Or
Yes.
did you mean to say no less than 10%?
Commissioner, if you take a look at page 102 of the
Yep.
petition, item 537 of the application from MGM, they state that while the overwhelming majority of jobs are anticipated to be held by existing regional residents, approximately 10% of jobs will likely be held by people moving to the area due to the need for specialized knowledge and experience.
Okay, so it's no more than 10.
No
You
more
would
than
put-
10%
would come from outside,
coming from outside the area. Yeah,
including the surrounding community area.
including, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And is that fact that 90% of the jobs will be filled by people who are already there, at least that's the goal, is that an ingredient of your conclusion that the casino won't have an effect on school population? Because the people who are already there and presumably who already have children in school are going to be the people who get the jobs.
Yes,
Or don't, yeah.
yes, it's a fair conclusion.
Yeah, but that's makes up the labor force, right? Okay.
You've, in your prior presentations too, you used the number of vacant units versus the number of expected new jobs. And always there are more vacant units than there are expected people to fill them. And that, but is there some, I mean, full employment is whatever, 3, 4, 5% unemployment is known as full employment, right? Whatever the number is now. There's probably some number of vacancy which is known as full absorption. You can't absorb 100% because some of the units aren't really habitable, or the sizes of families don't fit, or the locations are wrong, or whatever. Is there some relationship between demand for units and available units, some ratio that is sort of the minimum elasticity that is required to absorb new demand?
It's an interesting question. When we do market studies, we basically say that if occupancy is at 95% or greater, that is an indicator of unmet demand and the need to create more units. So it's not a direct answer to your question because people are always going to kind of be moving in and out.
Right.
And, one thing I will note is that when the census was done in 1999, the economy was actually still in a fairly good place. So that those numbers are, probably peaked, and then vacancy increased after that. The unemployment numbers that we gave you are current as of a week ago, so I'm not sure if that kind of,
Well, yeah, that's it. So,
It sheds a
so
little bit of light.
95% is in the nature of full absorption, is what you're saying, using the model that you so.
Yeah.
What is the net number here? You said Springfield is 10% vacancy rate, but Long Meadow has only 3%. Is there a net? Is that it, the 7? Average percent? Is that, so 7%?
well, I mean, again, if we're at this, yeah, if we looked at an average of 7%, that says that in essence, there are excess housing,
There is some
2% excess
flexibility.
housing units.
Right.
You know, one thing that we didn't focus a lot on, but just because we do market research in the daily course of our business, was we did note that although we didn't call every single town hall and say, what are you building? We do know that Northampton, along with Mass Development, is adding, you know, residential units. Springfield is not adding residential units because they're trying to occupy the current units that they're having. So for some of the communities that might have a lower vacancy rate, most likely there are developers going there and they're starting to put something in the pipeline if they're less than the 5%.
Right. Okay, interesting, thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. City Point Partners confirmed that there is no expected impact on Northampton's water and wastewater infrastructure. This was not raised by Northampton, but it will be part of the analysis that City Point Partners briefs the commission on when we get to Hamden and Long Meadow. Finally, Mark Vanderlinden will give a brief overview of his findings on social impacts, crime, problem gaming for the region. And again, it's not our intention to have Mark repeat the findings throughout the rest of the region. So, Mark, can you give us your analysis, please?
Sure. Move down a second. Good morning. Good morning, commissioners. Another beautiful Boston day.
So glad to be back.
I'm sure you are. You look well rested. I have to say that in reviewing the petitions for the area, that to a lesser degree than the ones for the slot parlors were mentioned potential social impacts. And so while I reviewed those petitions, and in many cases, there weren't social impacts that were specifically cited, I think that it's worth consideration about what are the potential social impacts which may accompany gaming expansion within the region. Another sort of disclaimer here is that it truly is difficult to accurately predict the actual impact, as it will ultimately, it varies from community to community, and it's dependent on a number of different variables, including what are the pre-existing risk factors within that community, what are the pre-existing protective factors within that community. So, for example, a small community with very few existing resources and a number of existing problems is likely going to be more profoundly impacted than a larger community where it has a more robust economy, less demand on those social services, and more entertainment options. So with that said, there's a number of different social indices that we are taking a look at within the commission, within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. There are a few that kind of always tend to rise to the top as the ones that people most commonly cite. That being problem gambling, that being crime, what is the burden on social services, and what happens not just with traffic, but maybe even more specifically, what's the connection between gaming expansion and traffic accidents and drunken driving. So first I wanted to talk about problem gambling and gambling disorders, and the increase of these when you introduce a new form of gambling. Specifically thinking about Northampton here, given its proximity to Springfield. What would the impact of problem gambling be on Northampton, given that it is not all that close relatively compared to the other communities to Springfield? Probably the most commonly cited resource on this is the 1999 U.S. gambling impact study. And it did find that location of a casino within 50 miles was associated with approximately a doubling of the rate of gambling disorders or problem gambling within an area.
Doubling?
Doubling, correct. Is this going to be true within any of these specific communities? Again, that is difficult to tell, and that is something that we are, as a commission, paying very, very close attention to as we establish our baseline and look to follow this up in the years to come. Another common...
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Does that study talk about the existing economic conditions in the community where the rates double, i.e., is there any correlation between a community in which the general economy is low and a community in which the general economy is high in terms of wage earning?
Yeah. That's getting much, much more specific, and this was kind of a U.S. aggregate study, and so that study specifically did not get as specific. And that's a very good question. Again, that kind of goes back to what is the condition of that community as it stands? What are the protective factors that it brings to the table as this gaming expands in the area? There are other studies that this is a study that there's a number of different studies that have looked at this issue. For example, there's Dr. Howard Schaefer, a local expert in this area, took a look at problem gambling and the availability of gambling in Nevada. Found that where there was more gambling availability within those specific counties, that there was a higher prevalence rate of problem gambling. Again, it doesn't, it's hard to speak specific to the question of, well, what was the local economy like besides that?
Okay. But I take it this is the kind of, one of the questions that may be answered by our research.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Could I just ask, just as long as we're on this, to put it a little more bluntly, there's a sense, I think, that gambling, casino gambling, slots gambling preys on poor people. There's a sense that in poor communities, people tend to be more prone to get in trouble. Are you aware of any evidence, actual research data that suggests that that is the case, that there is a greater propensity for problem gambling within lower income communities versus middle to higher? Yeah,
there's a piece in there where I took a look at the socioeconomic disparity of gambling. It did find that there was a body of evidence that found that poorer people gambled a higher percentage of their income on lottery or slot machines or gambling in general. More money in general was spent by higher incomes, but it was a lower percentage of their actual income that was being spent. So yes, there is evidence that would say that poor people spend a higher percentage of their income on gambling. Is that connected to slot machines? I think that there is some evidence that it's not just slot machines, but there's other types of gambling options that would be connected to as well, though.
That's fascinating. There are studies, this is not related, but it just occurred to me as I was listening to you. There are studies that also show that lower income groups devote a greater proportion of their income to charities than higher income groups. Isn't that so?
Yeah.
It's just, is it just a function of the fact that those folks have less income and not indicative of either necessarily either on the one hand greater generosity
Right.
or on the other hand a greater propensity for problem gambling? You know, it's
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think it's fascinating.
yeah, that is interesting.
You know, another piece connected to this is what happens over time. And so while we can take a look and say what's going to happen in the first couple years after the expansion or introduction of a new gaming option within this area, what happens after that? There's a lot of evidence that would say that people tend to adapt over time too. While if you do see an increase in rates of problem gambling and gambling disorders, you may see that decrease or return to approximately what it was prior to the introduction of the gambling option a few years down the line. And that adaptation would say that, you know, the novelty of it has worn off, that the effectiveness of prevention and education programs is taking effect, and or perhaps that the population of people that were vulnerable to gambling disorders have experienced that gambling disorder and have either moved on through recovery or moved on in some other way. And so it's another issue to take a look at. Okay.
Interesting, thank you.
Okay. There are a couple other issues that I think are interesting to take a look at too, and this goes back to what is the condition of the community before the introduction of gambling. And one would be taking a look at what's the burden on social services. And again, it's a difficult question to answer. Rob Williams, Rachel Volberg both co-authored a study taking a look at the evidence around this, and what they found is that, you know, typically you don't necessarily see a huge influx and increased burden on these social services. For one reason is that problem gamblers tend to not seek out treatment. They tend to not necessarily put a greater burden on the social services within an area. It's not to say that there aren't other social services that are intricately connected to that problem gambler, including child welfare, including the criminal justice system, including housing authorities, that sort of thing. But in terms of the actual number of problem gamblers seeking treatment, it's relatively low. I would like to think that as we move forward with our research agenda in Massachusetts, we really get a handle on what are the reasons who are the persons who are experiencing gambling disorders, and how can we better connect them with help, that we would see a higher rate of persons seeking out the help that we will be able to offer. But in terms of what does the existing evidence state, it's not very. There's just not a lot there. Another issue that I wanted to highlight was drunken driving incidents. So what is the increase of drunken driving incidents within a proximity of a casino? And this did seem to come up some within the surrounding community petitions. And there is actually a stronger body of evidence that would support this than not. And so one of the most recent ones and closest proximity was a Spectrum study done in Connecticut analyzing the existence of legalized gambling within the state of Connecticut and the incidence of drunken driving incidents. And what they found was that there was a positive correlation between the two. As gambling options increased within Connecticut, so did the number and rate of driving while intoxicated arrests. There was another one, Cotty, looking at the impact of casino on fatal alcohol-related traffic accidents just within the United States, and they found a strong link between the presence of a casino in a county and the number of alcohol-related fatal traffic accidents. And that one looks specifically at county by county level. Ombudsman Ziemba had asked if there was any evidence that showed within a certain number of miles of a casino, would you see an increase in DUIs or alcohol-related accidents? And I wasn't able to find evidence that took a look at it at that level. It was only from county to county level was I able to find the evidence.
We have some of the strongest dram shop laws in the country, laws that require, among other things, tracing back in most cases of where the person had been drinking when involved in either a fatal or some other kind of a traffic incident, and then strong penalties for serving that person both through lawsuits and through licensing. Is there any correlation in any of the studies that looks at the disincentives to over-serving created by statutory or other schemes and the number of incidents?
I did not find that, no. You know, I took a look at the applications, and I took a look at the applicant's response to the community petitions, and to see, you know, if a community is citing that drunken driving would be an incident, what are they actually doing to mitigate this problem? And there are efforts within Mohegan Sun, for example, mentioned that they have policies in place to make sure that there is specific training of employees, to make sure that they offer a ride home type of program. Whether this is offered, I know that there's training at the other applicants as well, but it was Mohegan Sun that had specifically mentioned that.
Director, do you have knowledge that one of the issues of just collecting statistics is there any knowledge that those were incidents of drunk driving where the vehicles actually came from the casinos? Do you know?
No.
That's another. I think if we can capture that information correctly, our research will be invaluable, because it's my understanding that police departments are not required to capture that information, which makes it difficult to say, yes, it's due to that casino being in that area.
Right, that's a great point. So yes, what is of the drunken driving incidents, which are originated where they were drinking at a local gaming establishment? And the evidence that I found did not take a look at that. That's absolutely something that I think that we should be taking a look at in Massachusetts.
Are we doing that? Are we trying? I would think that would be a hard thing to do, would be to change the local cops' data collection technology.
We're working with the police departments now.
We are.
We're having meetings as we speak to talk about ways to capture that information.
That'd be great.
Well, it certainly is captured already in when accidents result, isn't it? I'm almost positive that it is.
Well, those questions will be asked with a good accident investigation, crash investigation.
Right.
Certainly, it's important information to know where that person was consuming alcohol. But in a typical drunk driving arrest, that information is not captured.
Okay, right.
So that would be
Right.
important information.
Yeah.
It seems like it would be a big change to get
Yes.
the whole system to be willing, the whole
Crime in general,
Yeah.
being able to identify.
sources.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. Well,
Thank you, Mark.
all of us are around the edges of this incredible research project that you're working on. It's just going to be fascinating, and almost everything that we've been talking about here, we are going to be capturing in our research project. So it's going to be something. Mark,
Right.
do you have any? I'm sure there's no data on this, but just any sense or maybe data. The unique situation we have in Massachusetts is we're introducing casino gambling or into a state where we already have extraordinarily high per capita gambling. And do you have any sense, or, you know, is there any way to estimate, does that make it more or less likely that problem gambling will increase dramatically? Is there any reason to think that we're already saturated at the problem gambling level or closer to saturation because is there any way to intuit or deduce or know anything about that?
Yeah, I hate to speculate on that before our data comes out, and you know, we're doing this amazing baseline study, and as we expand gaming within Massachusetts, but you're right, we're far from being kind of a clean environment of gambling options. Right. When we have gambling options surrounding us from every state, including the lottery and social and charitable gaming, illegal gaming opportunities, internet gaming, et cetera, et cetera. And so what will the impact be? Perhaps we may find that there would be very little increase in problem gambling through the increase of gaming options within Massachusetts, given the amount of availability that there is currently. You may even throw out the option that you would see a decrease if we do this right, that we are providing appropriate education, appropriate prevention, intervention programs that would intervene in a more systematic way. That there's a whole range of possibilities that we could see.
Fascinating. Thank you. I'm sorry.
I have, were you going to touch on the general crime issue?
I can certainly do that.
That is consistently raised. That's one of the...
So again, I'm going to draw from Dr. Robert Williams in his review of the studies, both U.S. and internationally. He did a fantastic job of kind of pulling this together in a 2012 report. And evidence, basically, the jury is out in terms of what you may see with in terms of increase in crime. And so that he found evidence is somewhat mixed concerning the impact of legal gambling introduction has on crime rates. And the most common finding is that crime rates do indeed increase with increased gambling availability. But the main caveat to that study is that findings are referring to aggregate crime rates. Rather, some are focusing on the impacts for specific types of crimes, such as increase in fatal traffic accidents following the introduction of casinos. Other studies simply document that increased gambling at an individual level is associated with an increased likelihood of gambling-related crime. So it's several studies failed to find an increase in crime at all, or only found increases in some communities but not others. And Dr. Williams concluded that although there's good theoretical reasons to expect a positive relationship between gambling introduction and crime, it may not manifest itself. There are many factors other than gambling that could potentially mediate this relationship, such as what is the prior exposure to gambling, what are the existing policies and practices within a jurisdiction, what are the policies within the casinos themselves. And so it's, again, it kind of goes back to how are we moving forward and what types of regulations do we have in place to support the introduction of casinos in the slot parlor within Massachusetts.
And I take it that there's no study that shows the geographic dispersion of whatever crime may increase. Nor is there a good study that shows what type of crime we're talking about.
Not that I've found, no.
I raise that because, not because we shouldn't be concerned about this, but because it is a frequently raised, indeed it sometimes takes center stage, issue whenever this subject is raised. And like many other things, the question is, what are the facts, and how much do we really know?
Right.
And again, I think our study will show that, but intuitively, it seems to me that for certain kinds of crimes, the geographic dispersion of whatever rise there is likely to be very constricted. It's hard to figure out intuitively why, for example, an increase in assaultive behavior or robberies in the vicinity of a casino would spill over into communities miles away. Maybe it does, but it's hard to see that. So I look forward to the data that this study is going to yield on that as
Yeah.
well.
You know, it goes back to, theoretically, it seems plausible that you would see this increase in crime. But what do we really mean by crime, and how related is it to the expansion of gaming? And I think, as Commissioner Cameron had said, we are taking a very close look at this as we speak, that we're trying to sort these very specific issues out. What is related to the expansion of gaming, and what is that sort of outside noise that can impact this, and throw our findings off, or lead us down the wrong path.
Thank you.
Great stuff, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. So now we move on to other impacts and positive impacts. If the commissioners could turn to page 114 in their packet. Long Meadow does not include any other impacts in its petition. In regard to positive impacts, Northampton states that it will not experience positive impacts, and that MGM's representation that it will cross-promote Northampton contravenes the amenities-rich MGM proposal and the track record of gaming to provide a disincentive to patrons to visit entertainment facilities outside the facility, much less in other communities. MGM responds that there will be increases in visitation by out-of-state and international students and others, that it will create 3,000 permanent jobs, that workers will be well-trained, and that this will be good for the region. MGM's application speaks to other benefits, that approximately 50% of gaming revenue and more than 50% of non-gaming revenue will come from out-of-state visitors. MGM estimates operator vendor spending of $50 million annually in the region, and that the project will generate an additional $14 million in employee compensation to employees in Region B outside of Hampden County. Further, the project is estimated to generate 4,600 construction jobs in Region B, and between $470 million to $550 million in economic spending in Region B. With that, Commissioners, we conclude our analysis of each one of those factors.
Okay, thank you. Somebody want to try to sort of summarize the net of that, or maybe one of the commissioners, or do you just sort of, let's go back and sort of take a look at
So,
the bottom line.
So Commissioners, we took a look at proximity, and there were significant arguments that Northampton is not proximate. Northampton raised the fact that that commuters from Western Mass are accustomed to driving long distances for entertainment and other reasons, so that they should be deemed proximate. We went through a number of reviews regarding some of the operational concerns. HLT Advisory opined on significant economic effects and positive impacts that could accrue to Northampton, and did a review of the Camoin, excuse me, I think that's mispronounced, Miss Camoin, review that was conducted by Northampton, and found that that report did not look into some of the significant and positive impacts that could accrue to Northampton. We heard from LDS Consulting regarding housing and school impacts. They asserted that based on their analysis that they do not determine that there would be housing or school impacts for Northampton. Mr. Vanderlinden, you just heard his reports regarding how we are conducting many studies as we look forward to some of the other impacts on problem gaming, crime, and other associated negative effects from the facilities. And then finally, MGM has alleged that there will be very significant positive impacts from the facilities, but Northampton also alleges that Northampton will not benefit from those positive impacts.
Anybody?
Well, it seems to me that I've always thought of proximity, the first factor, as a functional rather than a geographic concept. I mean, there are outer boundaries geographically to what's proximate, but beyond that, it seems to me it's functional. So I'm willing to concede, and for purposes of analysis, that there is proximity between Northampton and Springfield. But the rest of it, the only other issue that Northampton raises, and I think the independent analysis has shown that there really isn't any impact in the areas that it didn't raise, is one that's based, it seems to me, on the concept that what we're talking about is a zero-sum world, and also a world in which there's going to be no benefit from the recapture of the dollars now going elsewhere. In terms of the zero-sum world, the fundamental premise, it seems to me, is that a dollar spent, a new dollar, or the new money that comes into the state that this statute is designed to create, is going to go exclusively into the casinos and is not going to go to Northampton. And worse, the existence of the casinos is going to suck money out of Northampton into the casinos. I just don't see any evidence of that, and it strikes me that that is illogical, given what MGM's marketing plan is and everything that they've told us about how they are going to operate. It seems to me perfectly compatible with the existence of a tourist-centered facility, whether it be gambling or other, that the regions around the facility are going to benefit from the influx of dollars that it's going to draw. And secondly, the repatriation of the dollars that are going elsewhere and the repatriation of the people who are spending those dollars, not traveling to Connecticut and Rhode Island, is going to have a positive impact on the region, including Northampton. So I don't see the case made for Northampton's claim that it's going to be adversely affected by the operation of the casino, and therefore, period. I'll just put a period.
Anybody else?
Well, yeah, just to agree with Commissioner McHugh, I was, as I was reading through the analysis and the arguments, the last time we met and today and in the packets, I always thought about, just from a personal perspective, if our ethics, enhanced code of ethics didn't preclude us, I could see myself going to a casino like the one in Springfield. And I never will, I guess, but the only way that I could probably go with my wife is to promise that we'd go to Northampton, where she loves to go. So there's the argument that we have touched on relative to repatriation and economic impact that comes from out of state is usually thought of by people in the abstract, but there's other considerations like a spouse or other things that would probably enhance the argument of this correlation of benefits, if you will. So I'm persuaded by the arguments made by MGM and perhaps substantiated by the analysis of our consultants.
Yeah, I as well was persuaded by HLT's review of this matter, where they pointed out that the positives were not taken into consideration, and that there's no evidence to the negatives that were that Northampton asserted. So I'm persuaded that there's not a significant impact here.
I would echo Commissioner McHugh in talking about the, some concession of the proximity argument. I mean, living in Western Mass, it's easy to scoot right up 91. There's usually relatively little traffic to get to Northampton if you choose to dine there or whatever. And it will take 20, 25 minutes. I would expect in Eastern Mass you can take 20 to 25 minutes to go to dinner and you're still in the same community.
Same block.
The same block even. Might not even get out of the parking garage.
Still Center Street and JP.
One missing piece of information that I'm not sure we can even begin to assemble the data on is not only the repatriation of gaming money, but obviously people from Massachusetts are going down to the facilities in Connecticut for entertainment purposes as well. And if there's an opportunity to kind of repatriate that entertainment dollar, which maybe we can't put as specific a number on, disappointing that, the study only stressed what the negative impacts would be, and for whatever reasons did not seem to chart a course of study relative to what the positive impacts could be on Northampton. I think from our original presentation, one of the figures that stuck out for me was a data point showing, I think it was between 2000 and 2010, amount of revenue spent or amount of money spent on, I think it was food and beverage between two communities, and both in the last 10 years had seen a rise. So it certainly was a critical data point for me to show that, there isn't one community's benefit is the other one's loss. So.
I would agree. I think Commissioner McHugh's description was, or analysis was right on, and I agree with the other comments. The one thought that does occur to me is this, that the industry has been evolving from the old model of casinos where they really were intentionally boxes that pulled everybody in, kept everybody in. Everybody talks about no windows and no light and no clocks, and was designed to get every possible dollar out of the consumer within that box. For a variety of reasons, having mostly to do with competition, I think that has begun to change as they've needed to bring other kinds of amenities and so forth. And certainly our legislation, coupled with our own evaluation criteria, have put tremendous pressure, I think, on the communities to be, on the facilities to be outward looking, to be collaborative in their marketing, and so forth and so on. And they've done that to a substantial extent. And one of the things that we talked about here is MGM's commitment to cross-marketing its other venues and related venues and so forth. All of which is great, and I think all of which is natural to some extent. However, it is on one hand, once we get past the licensing, a little counterintuitive. You're the GM for the facility at MGM Springfield. You've got a number. You're supposed to come in at a certain number. You miss your number, you're going to want to market more aggressively to your people. You're not going to be very interested in sending your people off to other venues. So as regulators, it's going to be important that we make sure that people stick to their commitments. Right now, everybody is happy talk about cross-marketing, and we love to promote tourism, and we're going to send our people to other places, and that's all well and good. But the dynamic changes once the licenses are awarded. And on behalf of the Northamptons of the world, and on behalf of all the surrounding businesses, as regulators, we're going to need to be sensitive to making sure that the industry maintains these commitments, even as they go through their own throes of competition and internal financial pressures and so on and so forth. Having said that, I agree also with the bottom line for Northampton. Somebody want to put that in the form of a motion if we're all set?
Well, I'd move that on the basis of the materials presented in writing and presented at the hearings, the Commission conclude that Northampton is not a surrounding community within the meaning of the statute.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion concluding Northampton is not a surrounding community signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I move to the City of Northampton's involuntary disbursement petition pursuant to our regulations 205 CMR 11403 2B. The Commission may approve the application upon a finding that there is a reasonable likelihood that the community will be designated a surrounding community pursuant to 205 CMR 12501, and that the request is reasonable in scope, and that the risk that the community will not be able to properly determine the impacts of a proposed gaming establishment without the requested funds outweighs the burden of the actual financial cost that will be borne by the applicant. And we just had a determination that Northampton is not a surrounding community, so I do not believe that it would meet the test that the Commission can approve upon a finding that there is a reasonable likelihood that the community will be designated a surrounding community.
Okay. Do we need to?
Just to be clear, I think we ought to just note, and it's almost metaphysics, but not quite, that the time they filed that petition is different from the time now, and it's perfectly conceivable that had we acted instantly, we could have found probable cause that they'd be designated, and yet found that they weren't. I mean, that happens all the time.
Correct.
And but we are deciding this today, not then. And in addition, for what it's worth, I had some substantial doubt about their qualification and likelihood of being designated as a surrounding community on the day that the presentations were made. So I think we can proceed as today, even with that anomaly, if you will, in the sequencing of the matters. But I think we ought to just note that we are, because we're trying to move this as quickly as possible, we are doing this in this fashion.
I agree with that. But can I ask, is the request for costs before us, are those costs already incurred, or is there any portion of those costs that have already been incurred, whether it was the Camoin report or other?
The Camoin report, that was a $17,500 expenditure, and to the best of my understanding, that's been expended. And then there was a $25,000 that was allocated for legal expenses. I'm not aware of how much was done prior to this date.
Other thoughts or comments? I mean, if the bottom line, if we're comfortable with Commissioner McHugh's sense of that, then I understand the point, and it's a little bit tricky. But I think I agree with Commissioner McHugh's conclusion.
Same here.
Okay.
So I would move that the motion for an involuntary disbursement be denied.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can now move on to the town of Hamden.
Mr. Chairman, I need to excuse myself during your deliberations on Hamden and Longmeadow.
Hamden and Longmeadow both?
Yep.
Okay.
So if you turn to page 3 in your Hamden packet, proximity.
Excuse me, John. Let's just have a brief break. We'll come back in 5 or 10 minutes. Okay. Great. All right, we will reconvene at about 10:45. And Commissioner Stebbins, I think, had a few words.
Sure, I didn't mean to beat a hasty retreat, everybody wondering why I disappeared, but as you recall, I excused myself from the earlier presentations on the host community, or surrounding community status for Long Meadow and Hampden, out of just an overabundance of caution in those proceedings, but for the time being, I didn't think it'd be fit for me to sit through this discussion at this point, so.
So you'll not participate in our decision about whether or not Hampden or Long Meadow should be deemed a surrounding community?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Now I'll leave again.
Now, try again. We just hate to see you go. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to Hampden, if the commissioners could turn to page 3 in their packets. Hampden asserts that it is 3 miles from the eastern border of Springfield, that it is approximately 8 miles from the facility. MGM states that the center of Hampden is approximately 11 miles from the facility, and that Hampden is not proximate, given the approximate 20-minute drive. Moving on to transportation infrastructure, I ask Rick Moore from City Point Partners to brief the commission about the findings and to also address the related matters of development impacts, and finally to state whether the Hampden water or wastewater infrastructure is in any way impacted by the MGM facility application. Please note that Hampden has not raised this as an issue, but it is part of our independent review, and we've asked City Point Partners to confirm our understanding. Mr. Moore?
Thank you, John. Good morning. Unlike Mr. Wynn, I brought some slides to help us along with our discussion. The first slide is an overview of the regional area, and just to help you orient yourself, this is Springfield, and these are the other 3 surrounding communities we're talking about. This is the Mass Turnpike, I-90, and then I-91 north-south. So essentially, the MGM site is at the crossroads of 2 major interstate highways, north-south and east-west. The Hampden is in this location to the southeast of Springfield. Again, as John said, it's about 10 miles from the facility. In looking at all the traffic information, we based our analysis on the traffic work that was done by MGM, and in some cases, the Pioneer Valley folks did an analysis, and the Department of Transportation also provided some comments on the traffic. So we took all that into consideration. 2 sort of general comments that apply to all the communities. First, in terms of construction-related impacts, we believe there will be none of any significance in the 3 towns we're talking about, primarily because of the robust interstate system, and that truck traffic generally will stay on the interstate system, easy access to the facility, and the MGM also has control over specifying that if needed. So we don't believe that even without the specification, there'll be a significant impact on construction-related impact for any of the 3 communities. The second thing is, in terms of traffic parlance, if you will, the analysis was basically done for the 2 peak hours of the casino traffic, which is a Friday PM and a Saturday PM. The peak Saturday is actually larger traffic generator than the peak Friday for the casino. However, if you superimpose that over the roadway network, the peak Friday condition in combination with the peak casino condition is worse than the Saturday condition. So for simplicity, we are just going to focus on the Friday PM peak hour condition. So the numbers you see and the percentages you see are based on that particular condition, which for all practical purposes you can consider the worst case. So now to Hampden, which is in this location. The traffic analysis looked at the distribution of traffic coming from the surrounding communities. And if they took the traffic generated from this particular community and other communities in the neighborhood who might travel through Hamden, they concluded that there were about 29 vehicles in total that would come from that part of the state and part of northern Connecticut that could enter or exit towards the casino. If you assume that that entire amount of traffic is on Allen Street, which, if you can see on the map, is this line, which basically is a two-lane road that runs through Hamden, which is a rural community, and if you assume that all of that 29 vehicles will travel to and from on Allen Street, that's the basis of the analysis. So if you look at the numbers, and if you go to the next slide, you can see this is Allen Street at the Friday peak hour period. The roadway currently carries about 540 vehicles.
That's both ways?
Both ways. The increase from the casino, as I mentioned, was about 29 vehicles, which is about a 5% increase. Now, if you look at the road in and of itself, it's a two-lane roadway with a capacity of approximately well over 3,000 vehicles a day. I'm sorry, 3,000 vehicles in the peak hour. And part of the reason for that is there are no traffic signals, so there's free flow through that particular area. If you look at the amount of traffic, even when you add the increase, we're less than 20% of the capacity of the road. So essentially, there's significant amount of available capacity on this particular road. And if all the vehicles use it, it will not stretch the capacity of the road. Therefore, to us, it was a reasonably straightforward conclusion that there was no significant adverse impact on Allen Street in Hamden.
Could I just ask a couple of questions about this? So presumably the 29 vehicles would be going virtually all inbound, right, going towards the casino
Well,
at that
there,
peak hour?
yeah, there is at the Friday PM, it wouldn't be a 50-50 split. It would be weighted towards the incoming traffic.
So,
yes.
I don't know how, what number, assume it's, for the sake of
60,
discussion.
65%.
Okay. Well, anyway, but it's more than 4.7 because it's some percent more. If the 540 is both ways, and that's got to be preponderantly what? Preponderantly outcoming, right? Because it's the end of the day and people are leaving the metro area. So that's more than 50% outbound, so
Right.
so it's something less than 270 vehicles an hour going inbound, and you're going to have something more than 20, than half than 14. So it's probably more like 10 or 15% increase rather than a 5% increase.
Right, if you're looking at it in one direction.
But
And
that the way you should look at it?
well, it would be a useful exercise if two things were there. First of all, we have so much extra capacity. If you divide the 3,600 by half, you still have a significant, more than 50% of the capacity available. And secondly, if the roadway was near capacity and adding a few vehicles or a small percentage of vehicles could aggravate an already serious problem or already congested problem, then you might drill down and look at those kind of numbers. But because we are, in our opinion, have so much flexibility here, so much reserve capacity, there was no need to drill down and look at those numbers. Although we did do that, and looking at them, there's significant extra capacity.
It just seems like for purposes of being conservative, it would be better in a proposal like this to not have an obvious assumption that seems off. I mean, it seems like it would have made more sense to call that 10% for the sake of this discussion. If what you're saying is right about capacity, it wouldn't have mattered, but it doesn't make it vulnerable to that kind of logical test, seems to me. Just while we're on this, so 3,600 capacity, then again, that's two-way, but even if you do it 50-50, that's 1,800 an hour. That's 30 a minute, is that right? Mm-hmm. Is that, and that's an appropriate number on
That's
a
right.
two-lane road in a town, 30 a
Right.
minute?
We actually analyzed that number,
One every 2 seconds.
right, based on a certain speed, the fact that there are no signals. Typically, you use the total amount, because when you do have signals, even though there may be other than a 50-50 split, you need to account for all the traffic in terms of timing. In this case, you're right, there's no signals, and looking at one lane is instructive. And we would have done that had we been even close to an issue.
So that number of 3,600 for this kind of a two-lane road must be an industry norm, and
That's right.
Presumably, that's not a contestable number, right?
No.
That's something that any logical person in your business would know.
It's both a rule of thumb, and we actually ran a
Okay.
simple analysis of it that confirmed that number.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So, again, we consider there to be no significant adverse impact in here.
Thank you, Rick. Commissioners, if you can now turn to page 56. This is the development section. We just heard from Mr. Moore that this was not addressed in Hamden's petition, but also that it is not, would not rise to a significant adverse impact based on the analysis from Mr. Moore and his colleagues.
There was one other issue that we needed to address in Hamden, which was the water and sewer. Since Hamden is not part of the Springfield Water and Sewer Commission district, they don't get water from Springfield, nor do they send sewage to Springfield. There's no impact from the casino in terms of water and sewer.
Did they raise water and sewer?
Beg your pardon?
Did they raise water? No, they didn't raise, okay, yeah.
Commissioners, if we can now turn to operations, page 63 of your packet. Operational concerns were not raised in the petition or the response. However, you've heard from Mark Vanderlinden, Lynn Sweet, and Lyle Hall on the regional reviews for each of the areas, and that Hamden is not significantly different from the regional reviews that were just discussed. And then if we could then turn to page 113 of the packet, that is other concerns and positive concerns. There were no other concerns that were raised by the applicant or the applicant. And finally, as you've heard, I outlined a lot of the positive impacts found in MGM's application and its responses in regard to positive impacts. So in sum, there was, regarding proximity, we had between 8 to 11 miles included in proximity, depending on which point you were measuring. We reviewed some of the traffic infrastructure, and Mr. Moore and his colleagues believe that there would be no significant impact from unrelated to traffic or development concerns. And then we've heard general reviews on operational concerns from the earlier presentation.
Questions, comments?
It seems to me that the excess, the single issue that's been raised is that the traffic impact, the excess capacity is substantial, no matter how, God bless you, no matter how you use those numbers. And it seems to me that there will be no adverse impact.
Seems that way to me, too.
I agree.
Right? You want to make?
Sure, I can make a motion. So I would move that based on the information presented in the packets and the analysis of our consultants as described here today, that the community of Hamden not be designated as surrounding community.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it 4-0 unanimously.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps this would be a good time to raise a point that you raised at the last community hearing on the 28th, that just because a community is not successful in becoming a surrounding community for the purposes of these proceedings, that does not mean that a community could not avail itself of the Community Mitigation Fund in the event that all of the analysis that we prove is somewhat incorrect, or that it's not as accurate as we think that it is. And that fund could be populated with in excess of $20 million per year. There's some very substantial resources that could benefit communities in the event of mitigation needs.
Yeah, I agree. That's an important point. Thank you.
Now, now we turn to the town of Long Meadow. In regard to proximity, if you turn to page 3 of your packets, Long Meadow asserts that its center is approximately 3.6 miles from the site, that it shares an extensive border with Springfield, and that the intersection of Long Meadow Street and Forest Glen Road is only 2.2 miles from the site. MGM concedes that Long Meadow is proximate. Now, if you can move to page 10, traffic infrastructure. I again ask Mr. Moore of City Point Partners to review this issue, to explain how Long Meadow may be impacted by development concerns, the construction concerns, and to speak out about Long Meadow's concerns about water and wastewater impacts. Long Meadow specifically raised the issue of water and wastewater in its analysis. Mr. Moore?
Thank you. The Long Meadow traffic issue is a little bit more complex. I'd like you to take a look at this map for a minute, and just to orient yourself, this is the casino location in Springfield. This is I-91 north-south. This is approximately the Long Meadow border. This is Route 5, which parallels 91, and the main issue that we'll talk about today is the impact on Route 5 and the interaction between 5 and 91. These two intersections were studied both by the applicant, MGM. They were reviewed by the Pioneer Valley folks, and as well as Mass DOT. This northern intersection, very close to 91, is about 2.3 miles from the casino. Now, if you look at the traffic condition on both roads, if you look at Route 5, the PM peak hour traffic is 918 vehicles per hour, and the casino will add about 53 vehicles to that amount. That 53 vehicles accounts for about 3.5% of the casino-generated traffic. Then, if you move to the I-91 and look at the box on the left side, the Friday PM peak is slightly over 7,000 vehicles per hour, and the casino will add about 300 vehicles per hour, and that's about 19.5% of the casino traffic. Now, if you add the 3.5% and the 19.5%, you get 23% of the casino traffic that's running north-south through the combined 91 Route 5 corridor. Now, these numbers are based on the Pioneer Valley assessment of the traffic study that was done by MGM. MGM had slightly lower numbers. They had slightly lower trip generation by about 13%, and MGM took to 23% of the total vehicles going north and south, and they put 20% on 91 and 3% on Route 5. So if you take the change from the casino traffic analysis, and all those numbers added up to about 36 vehicles on Route 5. So you go from 36 vehicles on Route 5, both ways. You go to the Pioneer Valley assessment of that traffic study, and they raised it based on trip generation and distribution to the 53. You with me so far? Okay.
Right.
Now, the casino did an analysis of those two intersections, And they concluded that in the future, the level of service of the entire intersection would not change. Level of service being how the intersection operates. These are signalized intersections. However, once they look at individual turning movements, because you can assign a level of service to turning movements as well as to the aggregate of the intersection, they found that the southbound movement that makes a left turn onto Forest Avenue was degraded from an LOS-D, which is acceptable, to an LOS-E, which is considered problematic. As you go from A to F, A through D is generally considered
This is southbound on 5.
5.
At
Make-
that first intersection.
making a left
Going
turn.
left. Okay, got
Okay.
it.
So in order to improve that one turning movement, and left turns are always the problematic turn, they recommended a signal timing change at that intersection that improved that left turn or upgraded it from an E back to a D, and they concluded that therefore that signal, the intersection would operate overall at level of service C and was appropriate, and we would agree with that.
And who's the "they" in this case?
This is the casino, this is MGM.
Okay.
Right. Now, if you add to that additional traffic going from the 36 additional vehicles to the 53 additional vehicles, there would be, again, a slightly degrading of that intersection, and probably you could resolve that issue with another refinement in the turning movement calculations or the turning movement timings. And if that were the end of the story, I think it would be a difficult decision as to whether this impact raises to the level of significantly adverse. However, that's not really the end of the story, because both the Department of Transportation and the Pioneer Valley identify the congestion on 91 in this area right here, where there is a lane drop. So the roadway goes from 3 lanes to 2 lanes through that sort of curve. There's some weaving movements in that area, and then it opens back up to the 3 lanes again. Because there is congestion at that location, both DOT and Pioneer Valley suggested that that congestion on 91 might cause people coming from the south, some portion of that 7,000 and the additional 300, to divert onto Route 5 and to use it basically as a shortcut to go around the congestion on 91 here and then get back.
Is the lane drop north or south or both?
It's, the lane drop we're concerned about is north.
Is north.
North.
Okay.
So that would, depending on how that congestion would change people's driving patterns, that could divert more traffic onto Route 5 and further increase the 53 to some additional number. Now, both DOT and Pioneer Valley suggest that this needs to be looked at, but to date it hasn't been looked at, and we don't have any definitive information about what magnitude of this additional congestion and this additional diversion might occur. And we feel that that uncertainty, and which we feel will be an increase at some level, is enough to cause us to say that there will be a potential adverse impact on Route 5 in Longmeadow. So just to summarize, if we can go to the next slide. We've talked about Route 5 and the amount of vehicles on the roadway, the increase in both directions from the casino, which is almost a 60% increase, the traffic on 91. We talked about the 2 signalized intersections that were studied. We spoke of the fact that there was no overall change in LOS, but to get there, they had to do some mitigation. So there's an acknowledgement that there was an impact, and mitigation was necessary in terms of signal timing. And then further, this whole issue of diversion was raised by Mass DOT and the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, and to date has not been resolved. And based on the fact that we likely will have more than those 36 vehicles, 53, and potentially more than that, and as you can see, it wouldn't take too many more of this 300 and the 7,000 to move this up significantly, that we conclude that there is a potential adverse impact on Route 5. I'll stop now for a minute.
I have a question. Do you know, or is this part of your point that it has not been studied, the level of service currently northbound on Route 5?
No, the level of service has been studied for those two intersections at the MGM, based on the MGM traffic data. It has not been studied based on the higher numbers or a what-if diversion number from 91. That has not been studied. And both agencies have recommended that that be done based on some sophisticated computer models, transportation models, as well as time of travel studies. There are a number of ways you can do this, particularly given the cell phone technology today and what you can glean from driving habits from cell phone technology and some sophisticated computer models. In fact, there was an article in the Globe today about people getting more information about their travel habits, and this is a good example of that, whether it's from the radio or from an app on your phone, or whether it's some other source. Their traffic driving patterns are becoming very sophisticated.
The two intersections we're talking about are the one at Route 5 and Forest Glen.
Yes,
And Route 5 and Converse
Converse,
Street.
correct.
Right.
You go back to that previous slide.
And those two intersections are both in Long Meadow or just one?
Both of them in
Both
on
of them
Long
are.
And what percent of capacity is Route 5 northbound at
Well,
Friday Peak now?
When you have signals along the roadway, the capacity is basically a function of the level of service of those intersections. So, as I said before, the level of service at the two intersections are acceptable in the future condition based on the MGM
Numbers.
analysis, level of service D or C or better. So now and in the future with the additional traffic, the overall level of service is acceptable. The caveat that we mentioned is that looked at those intersections in isolation,
Without the diversion?
without the diversion.
And, right. And how do you, are those remediated by signal changes? Whatever the impact is it likely to be able to be remediated by
Yes.
signal changes like it did the left turn southbound?
Signal changes, but potentially signal changes that would be required of more sophisticated equipment. So in other words, you may not be able to just go out there now and tinker with the equipment that's out there. You may need more sophisticated equipment. And I think the Pioneer Valley suggested that the ultimate solution is actually more sophisticated equipment. So it's not just, resetting the current signals, it's potentially a new set of signals that are much smarter and can adapt to the traffic demands as they occur.
The Pioneer, Pioneer, at page 28 of the book, recommended a whole bunch of things, it looks like, for those intersections. But I take it that we don't have to go that far in order to say those are what is needed in order to determine that there's an impact.
Well, I don't think that they're suggesting significant geometric changes. I think they're suggesting a more sophisticated signal system.
Right, right.
But I believe you're saying the study has to be done first, so that the real numbers will be evident, and then the next step would, based on a new study, then you go to the next step, which would be more sophisticated equipment. Is that accurate?
Yes, we agree with the Pioneer Valley's comments and with Mass DOT that interaction of the two roads needs to be studied, yes.
But, right, just following on what I asked was, could you do it with signal changes? You said that, yes, but PVPC had said it probably would require more elaborate, but they're also talking about a new lane, so you're talking real money here. You're not talking about just a new signal system,
Well,
according to PVPC.
Yeah, a new signal equipment is a significant investment. Just the signal equipment without the geometric changes. Longmeadow has steadfastly rejected geometric changes to keep the character of the road as it currently is.
Oh, I see. Okay. But in any event, as Commissioner McHugh said, at the moment, that's not our problem. Our problem is to determine whether this is a surrounding community or not. And if it is, then the parties will figure out what remediation is
Correct.
appropriate. Okay. Anybody else?
Can I make a point about the water and sewer, if it's
yeah.
appropriate now? Longmeadow receives water from the Springfield Water and Sewer Commission, and they send their sewage to Springfield, which acts as a regional water and sewer agency. On the water side, they get water from a reservoir, which is west of town. The capacity that they are permitted is almost 40 million gallons a day, so they can take about 40 million gallons a day out of the reservoir. They're currently using about 35 million gallons a day. So
This is
they're
Longmeadow.
this is the entire
Entire- oh, the
regional
water district,
area. So the regional authority has essentially a 5 million gallon, capacity, just like the roadway capacity. The casino will use about 0.2 MGD of that capacity, or about 5% of their reserve capacity. So they have 5 million. The casino is going to use 0.2 million of that, 5%. So there's really no concern about lack of water. On the sewer side, the numbers are even more compelling in the sense that there's a sewage treatment plant on the west side of the river, right about here, that has a capacity of almost 70 million gallons a day. And they're using about 50 million gallons a day currently, on average. So there's a significantly, almost a 20 MGD capacity. If you think of the numbers we talked about 0.2 sewage, it's about a 1% use of their available capacity. So in both cases, the Springfield Water and Sewer Commission has ample capacity to serve water and sewer without impacting Longmeadow, or any of the other communities for that matter.
Okay.
I have a question. Perhaps John can help me refresh my memory, but MGM does not necessarily dispute the assertion or the status of surrounding community from Longmeadow. It strikes me as it's the amount of impacts and compensation or mitigation monies that may be at stake here. Is that a fair statement?
Almost. What you point out is that there's been a big contention between the two parties about the amount of the mitigation. I think MGM has made the argument that it has voluntarily entered into agreements with a number of different communities, but they believe that in order to meet the statutory standard and the regulatory standard, at least in its petitions and petition responses, believe that Longmeadow didn't rise to that level. But I think that they would agree that there are impacts, but that there weren't significant enough impacts to rise to the regulatory statutory threshold, I believe is probably the way that they would characterize it.
That MGM would characterize it.
Okay, commissioners. We have, if you can point to page 98 of your packet, development concerns, development impacts. Mr. Moore just gave us the benefit of the development impacts. Long Meadow did not specifically raise development impacts in its petition. MGM asserted that it would be within the commission's discretion to not consider this factor, as it wasn't raised by Long Meadow. But as you know, that is not the way that we analyze these petitions. I will note that the DEIR certificate notes that more detailed information is necessary on items such as haul routes and a traffic management plan. Those would all be components of their final environmental impact report. But we have heard the analysis from Mr. Moore. On operational level, page 107. Long Meadow asserts that it'll experience significant public safety needs, fire needs, and impacts on social services, including impacts from DUI incidents. It alleged code enforcement concerns. Also, Long Meadow, as noted, raised water and wastewater concerns. MGM responds that data from travel during the Big E demonstrate that crash rates relative to some of the public safety concerns may decrease with higher congestion periods. Further, MGM has invested significant resources to the Springfield Police Department, as MGM notes through its host community agreement. MGM also points to a study that was performed by UNLV that states that that crimes, because of increased numbers of people, may be increased in the immediate vicinity, but that overall rates will remain unchanged. Further, MGM notes that its own security complement will be over 100 full-time equivalent professionals. And as you note, we have previously heard from Mark Vanderlinden regarding these concerns. Lynn Sweet had addressed some of the concerns regarding some of the code inspection issues. And Mr. Moore, as we just mentioned, addressed the water and wastewater concerns. In regard to other impacts, if you turn to page 168 of your packets, no other impacts were included or responded to by the petitioner and the applicant. On page 169, positive impacts. Long Meadow notes that because it is predominantly residential, it will not experience positive impacts. Also, the cost of transportation improvements cannot be outweighed by positive impacts. The applicant responded with a recitation of positive impacts we have already discussed, such as 2,000 local construction jobs, 3,000 permanent jobs, and $50 million in annual local spending on vendors and suppliers. And with that, Commissioners, I put it to you for consideration.
Thoughts, questions, reactions?
There are two aspects of this that of the petition and the response that I found troublesome. And so I just wanted to say something about that before getting into the merits of this. First of all, the notion that the casino operators are not responsible for any increases that further diminish the capacity or the level of service of already deficient roads strikes me as untenable. To come into an area that is experiencing traffic issues or is already at full capacity and put a facility that increases the traffic is to create a problem that needs remediation, it seems to me. And so I don't find that argument persuasive at all. Mr. Moore didn't talk about it, perhaps because he found it unpersuasive as well, but I just thought it was worth saying that. Conversely, Longmeadow's argument that it's not only the traffic from the casino that MGM should be concerned with, But MGM's plan is to place a facility in the heart of Springfield, which will regenerate the entire area around the casino, and therefore add to traffic from the regeneration, which MGM should compensate Long Meadow for, strikes me as equally specious. The notion that somehow somebody who comes in and develops or starts the development process for an area of a city that badly needs it should somehow be accountable for paying for the consequences of the sequelae of its investment.
The what?
The sequels, the things that follow its investments, is to be a huge disincentive to anybody making the investment in the first place. And so I think that that is an equally specious argument. I say that because I'm persuaded that because of the traffic analysis that was succinctly presented by Mr. Moore, Long Meadow is a surrounding community for the traffic purposes. But as we talked about before, this designation is something of an on-off switch. You're either a surrounding community or you're not a surrounding community. And if you are a surrounding community, there are a variety of things that go with that territory. So I have something further to say about that before we're finished, but I do think they're a surrounding community because of those impacts on Route 5 and the Route 5 area and some of the feeders to Route 5. But I reject those arguments on both sides that I just described.
Interesting. Anybody else?
I found our traffic analysis to be persuasive, pretty straightforward. There will be an impact. And for that reason, I agree that they will be a surrounding community, or should be, rather.
Just walking through what would happen next, it occurs to me that those two intersections need to be studied in more detail, or actually need to be studied with the feedback that Mass DOT and the PVPC have provided, which is this alternative or this reroutement scenario. But once that gets, is that going to be the basis for which the parties can reach some kind of mitigation agreement, or is our timeline not necessarily in sequence with that study?
As you know, the parties have 30 days from today to negotiate an agreement, so I'm not certain that any of these types of further studies would be concluded within that period. Applicants and communities have made agreements throughout the Commonwealth in anticipation of events that can happen or will happen in the future. For example, the look-back agreement that MGM has proposed, again, Long Meadow has been critical of their particular version of a look-back agreement, but these are the types of things that could be negotiated on by the parties.
Can you give us a sense of other situations that are comparable? This, of all of the potential claims for surrounding community status, there's one fairly limited one that our consultant seems to have merit, which is this one segment of Route 5 at a particular time if certain things happen. Does that meet the threshold that we have typically used in other situations?
The most comparable is the town of Bolton, where we took a look at the impact that would occur as a result of the traffic coming from 495, and based on that one concern. Again, one thing about this process is that we're predicting the future. And
Yeah.
with anything that we do, it's difficult to predict the future. So some operational
Yeah.
concerns, as Mr. Van der Linden pointed out, may become more of a reality than we anticipated at this point. But the most comparable situation would be Bolton, as you
Now,
ask.
remind me, where are they in the DEIR?
MGM just received its DEIR certificate, I believe it was last Monday. And then they'll have to file their final.
And that DEIR included those comments relative to the two intersections?
That's correct.
Which was supportive of this reading.
That's supportive of this reading.
Yeah. All right. Anything else, other thoughts? Seems like it's sort of a close call in a way, but I think, you know, the Bolton model, that's what I was looking for, and I guess if it is significantly adverse if you're in that particular area, and that's what we're potentially significantly adverse, and that's what we're talking about, so I guess I'd probably go along with that. Do you have a motion?
Sure, I can make one. Well, based on the information as presented to this commission in the packets and as summarized here by our traffic consultants, that this commission do designate the town of Long Meadow to be a surrounding community in the MGM application.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Yes, I would like to just note as part of the discussion, not to amend the motion, as part of the discussion, that I at least am voting, going to vote in the affirmative on this because of the traffic at these intersections and related problems on some of the other intersections that have been discussed in the reports, but primarily generated by the traffic at these two intersections that we just described, and for no other reason. And I just note that for the record. That's why I'm voting for this, and I'm not voting for any other aspect of it. As I said before, it's an on-off switch, but I want to make that plain.
I actually do agree and would be happy to put it into the motion, but I know that's not what our regulations really call for. But I agree with the notion that it is because of the traffic issues at these two intersections that we are persuaded by this.
It was certainly clear from my comments that I feel the same way. Other comments? All in favor of the motion designating Long Meadow as a surrounding community signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0 unanimous vote.
Now, can I just say one other thing, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to be very brief about this because it's not the time or the place, but I had mentioned before my desire to have all five of us talk about whether there should be some kind of a cap, some kind of a mechanism, let's put it that way, to deal with grossly unsatisfactory results of an arbitration process. And I simply note here in this context that I look forward to having that discussion.
Okay. And I would like to observe one thing too. We were given the task, this unusual task by the legislature to determine surrounding communities or not, and to have surrounding communities have a degree of mitigation, be entitled to a degree of mitigation and an agreement pre-award of a license, which is in itself unique, I think, in the country. But we have also implemented that, you all have implemented that with extraordinary diligence. I mean, this is an amazing amount of work to take very seriously the pros and cons of a community's concern and a bidder's, comparable concerns. And it's up on our website for everybody to see. It could not possibly be a more transparent process. It couldn't possibly be more data-driven. We might be right or we might be wrong, but the process, I think, is an extraordinary one. And it was one it's not our credit. We were given this by the legislature, but I just hope people will take note of it. Even the members of the press. There's 400 pages of thoughtful written analysis of just these three simple questions in front of us. So I say thank you to you, John. You've done a great job on this.
Terrific job.
To the consultants and everybody. But frankly, I feel good that it's, we're taking this process very seriously and handling it the way we should be.
And
I
we
would echo
cer-
that.
We certainly hope that remaining communities and applicants will avail themselves of the opportunity to reach an agreement if that is within their interests, but we'll continue on to do this type of review.
Okay, great.
I would echo that, and then just to also follow up on Commissioner McHugh's point, one of the policy decisions that we will have to consider at some point, maybe not in the near future, is the Community Mitigation Fund, whether that would be allocated per region or collectively. It's something that we look forward to manage and look at those grant applications. And there's a case to be made on either way, that impacts should be addressed with money that comes out of that activity in that region, or maybe some impacts would be such that need to be addressed before impacts elsewhere. So as we consider how we're going to manage that fund, it's one of the things that we need to start thinking about.
One of many.
One of many.
Commissioner McHugh, when is it on our agenda to address the issue you were talking about? I know we've talked about this a few times.
Yeah, is it this Thursday?
It's coming up
Yeah.
this Thursday? Okay,
Yep.
okay.
What was it on
So then I
March
can-
6th, I believe?
Or
Oh.
it's either this Thursday or the next meeting. It's soon.
We don't have one on the 26th, I don't think. Yeah.
The
Okay.
6th.
All right, so it's on the
Yeah,
schedule.
it's-
Okay, good. All right, thank you all. We get to item 2 on our agenda. Item 3, which is the Hanover Theater impacted live entertainment venue.
Oh, Mr. Chairman,
Oh,
we still
sorry.
have an I Love question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what I was saying, wasn't it?
We have Eastern States.
Eastern States.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, right. For Region B, right.
Oh, this is mine.
Commissioner Stebbins has rejoined us.
Oh, great.
Director Griffin,
Hello, welcome back.
thank you.
Chairman Crosby, Commissioners, I was expecting to review I Love petitions from 2 venues, but we received some good news over the weekend that the Majestic Theater and MGM have come to an agreement. So today we are reviewing the petition from Eastern States Exposition in West Springfield relative to the MGM. So on January 28th, we had a chance to hear from Eugene Cassidy, President and CEO of ESE, and Mike Mathis and his team from MGM. And in that meeting, we heard information from both sides. We also have the I Love petition, the applicant response, and additional information that was supplied to us. And you have that information in front of you. And today you will decide whether to accept or deny the petition based on the following conditions and considerations in the statute. And the conditions that were set in the statute are, is the venue a not-for-profit or municipally owned organization? And the commissioners will review the type of performance offered, the proximity to the gaming establishment, the venue capacity, and the potential negative impacts, including the applicant geographic exclusivity clause, if there is one. So if you would turn to the I Love petition analysis relative to Eastern States and MGM Springfield. Oh, and I should actually, I know Lyle Hall was introduced earlier from HLT, and HLT has provided some excellent analysis relative to this petition as well. So, on page 3 of the analysis, we reviewed the venue ownership, and by agreement of all parties, Eastern States Exposition is a nonprofit with the federal public charity designation 501c3. And on page 4, we reviewed the proximity, and by agreement of all parties, Eastern States Exposition is situated on approximately 175 acres across the Connecticut River in West Springfield, about 1.9 miles away from MGM Springfield. So, on page 5, we reviewed the venue capacity and the types of performances offered by that venue. And here, we looked at the fact that MGM Springfield is not building its own ticketed entertainment venue, but instead has agreements with existing venues. The agreement in place with the Mass Convention Center Authority obliges MGM to underwrite a minimum of 4 events each year at the Mass Mutual Center, including a variety of marketing, promotional, co-promoting, booking, and scheduling activities. The host community agreement with the city of Springfield obliges MGM to underwrite a minimum of 3 events each at Symphony Hall and City Stage each year. Eastern States Xfinity Arena and the Coliseum offer 6,500 and 6,000 seats respectively, while the Mass Mutual Center has 8,000 seats. The Mass Mutual Center is capable of staging and has historically staged events that are similar to events at the Xfinity and the Coliseum. And I'm going to actually turn it over at this point to Lyle Hall to also talk about some of the nuances with these venues.
Thank you, Director Griffin, and back again. As Director Griffin mentioned, we were engaged to consider the applicability of ESE, if I can use the acronym, as an ILEV. ESE's contention is that the MGM support of the Mass Mutual Center, in addition to Symphony Hall and City Stage, will create a situation where ESE will be harmed, given potential competition for entertainment and other types of events going through those buildings. ESE has submitted a fairly wide-ranging petition and prepared an economic impact study that spoke not only to ESE, the big E event, and the balance of the other buildings and activities that occur on that site. And I think here it's important to understand that ESE is a complex and relatively large organization that, as Director Griffin has mentioned, includes not only the 17-day fair, but a number of event venues on site, both the Coliseum and Xfinity Arena, as well as a number of trade and consumer show buildings and the Storrowtown Historic Village. I think where we went from here was to try and understand the relationship of ESE and taking it back to the definition of what an ILEV was. And if you'll bear with me, I just wanted to read out the sentence that Director Griffin touched on, and that is that an ILEV is defined as a not-for-profit or municipally owned performance venue designed in whole or in part for the presentation of live concerts, comedy, and theatrical performances, and then goes on to talk about which the commission might determine could experience a negative impact. So our focus was on that definition of live concert, comedy, and theatrical performances. We asked through the commission, ESE, to provide an event list for 2013 and 2014, and we reviewed that list. Obviously, the 14 list is scheduled events. They've not occurred yet. And we also took into account ESE CEO Gene Cassidy's comment at the January commission meeting about the Big E event accounting for some 82% of total ESE revenue, the 17 days of the fair. Taking that into account, our determination is that ESE itself does not qualify as an ILEV. But if you look at the three test points on what constitutes an ILEV: proximity, capacity, and similarity of performances, there are two buildings on the ESE grounds that could qualify as an ILEV, and those would be the Xfinity Arena, which is a seasonal building, seasonally operated building, and the Coliseum. And clearly they do qualify as an ILEV from a proximity and capacity point of view. However, putting aside the Big E Fair for a moment, we do not believe they qualify as, from the third test, which is similarity of performances, as the preponderance of events that occur on the site and in those two buildings are not live concerts, comedy, or theatrical performances. We note that MGM, in its petition, references an agreement that they have been looking to work with ESE on ensuring that they do not compete with ESE on booking events through the 17-day fair. That is not in the application itself, it's in the petition. We think that if that was enshrined in the agreement or in the license, that would give the ESE significant protection over that period. We might go on to suggest that protection be granted for a period of time before and after the event to in order a significant protection. But our conclusion is that the ESE does not qualify as an ILEV, and that we would suggest, though, that the Commission consider some way of making sure that the commitments that MGM has made in discussions with ESE are somehow attached to or looked at as part of the license itself.
Could you, anybody else, questions?
I do have
Just-
some, but go ahead.
Just, can you quickly re-clarify, you did not think they fit the ILEV definition because of similarity of performances? Can you just go back over that?
The three tests, as I understand it, Commissioner, are that to be considered an ILEV is that the venue has to be proximate to the casino, it has to have similar capacity as the casino,
Right.
and it has to have a history of programming that would be similar to what the casino would be programming in its event. The majority of events that are programmed outside the Big E Fair at ESE are equine, agricultural, animal, and like-related events that are probably most likely not what MGM is considering programming in the Mass Mutual Center or Symphony Hall.
Okay.
You said a preponderance, but what does that mean? How many are there that would be competitive or would be similar type of?
The only event that we saw that might fall into the category of live concerts, comedy, and theatrical performances was a circus. And my argument on the circus would be if that's a family-oriented event, it's probably not what a casino operator would be looking to try and attract to a building they were operating.
So in 2013 and 14, there was only one event that you thought looked like it qualified by
Outside of the Big E Fair.
outside of the Big E
Yes.
period itself. Well, that's okay. It's more than a preponderance. That's okay.
But during the Big E period, the 17 days of the fair, there are a number of theatrical performances
There are
in those
commercial entertainment events that would fall into that category.
under that category.
And that's my comment about MGM saying in its rebuttal to the petition that, and in an agreement they had been trying to work out with ESE, that they would have a standstill arrangement of some sort where they wouldn't compete with the Big E Fair for those types of events. In my view, that agreement needs to extend beyond just the run of the fair, because in an exclusivity period of any kind of traveling entertainer, you're probably going to want a period of at least 30 days before and after the event to give a significant buffer from a ticket sale point of view.
So I think your recommendation is that they do not qualify, but you'd like us to ensure, they've already agreed to, they understand the importance anyway and plan to enter into a broader agreement, but you would like us to ensure that it goes even longer than that, 30 plus and 30 after. Is that accurate?
Two parts, Commissioner. They've not so much agreed as they've offered to ESE. They have not agreed, or it's not a part of their application, so I think you need to deal with that. And then secondly, yes, I think the period in which they're not competing should be extended before and after the run of the Big E event.
But if they do compete on those two venues during the 17 days of the Big E, or and as well as a month or so on either side, why do they not meet the criteria? You said they don't meet the third criteria because it's not similar except for the big E period. Why does that take them out of the qualification?
Well, it's a question of who's qualifying now. It's the ESE has not done those types of events outside of that period, so unless they change their programming pattern going forward.
But they do those types of events during that period.
Yes.
So why are you accepting that period? Why doesn't, there's nothing that says it's got to be all year long in order, it has to have similar events all year long. It just says it has to have similar events.
Right, but my assumption, perhaps I'm wrong, in reading the laws, is that the intention is to prevent negative impacts on what's currently been happening. If you were to allow ESE to say we're now going to program those buildings entirely differently than we've been doing it the last number of years and claim that we're negatively impacted, that's a forward-looking, newly created impact.
Maybe I'm missing something here, but you're looking and saying they don't qualify because of not meeting the third criteria, except during a 17-day period. Maybe you actually think it should be more than a 17-day period. Why does that not mean they qualify? I mean, why wouldn't you read that and say, yeah, they do meet the criteria because at least during a 17-day period, if not more, they do have similar events? I don't understand why you.
But then, I guess we could say the same thing, that they qualify as an ILEV for that 2-week period out of the 52-week year.
Well, it's an on-off switch, as Commissioner McHugh said. You're either an ILEV or you're not an ILEV. And there's been nothing about timing. You know, either you meet those criteria or you don't meet those criteria. And so, and again, I'm not sure I'm interpreting this right, but it's coming from, you're saying there actually is a potential impact, and although you don't think they qualify as an ILEV, we probably ought to use our authority, if we can find some such authority, to put ILEV-type protections into their agreement. If we award a license to them, that's a roundabout way of saying they are an ILEV. Why don't we just call them an ILEV?
Well, I think on that note, we should look at the other piece here, which is that MGM is offering support of another venue that is, to their benefit. It's also is a state-owned property, and they're not building an arena as they have argued, and that their promise of that support is what generates this. They have promised to do it outside of the concentrated period that really concerns the Big E. So in the abstract, your argument is a good one, but I think it needs to be put into the context of what is giving genesis to this concern, which is the support of another venue. And as long as they...
But are you saying that's different from if it were their own venue?
I think so. The way there's an argument to be made that in reading the statute relative to the impacted live entertainment is because there's this preclusion from building venues under 1,000 and above 3,000 or 3,500 seats. 3,500. That the intent was that there was not going to be a venue at the site, at the casino that would be directly impacting these other venues. I believe this is a great example of what constitutes a positive impact. MGM's proposal of underwriting acts across the street is to their benefit, but they are clearly doing it in conjunction with these other three organizations. That so long as they don't do it at the same times during the Big E, it would be, in my opinion, a really good outcome.
I was troubled is too strong a word, but I was interested in the same point. They're not building their own facility. Do we know why they entered into agreements with Mass Mutual and the other venues. Was that part of the host community agreement?
One was the
Yes.
host community, yes.
Two were.
All right.
Yes, they were.
So they don't build their own performance venue. They enter into agreements with these others because of the host community agreement. They voluntarily enter into the agreements with the two others, the concert venue, the Symphony Hall, and the
City
other
Stage.
City Stage.
City Stage. And they thereby create the potential for an adverse impact on ESE's facility that wouldn't be present if they just set up their casino and didn't build an
That's right.
entertainment venue.
That's right.
So by providing a positive benefit to some regional ILIVs, they have created the potential for a negative impact on another one.
Right.
So they're hoist by their own petard.
But I think this comes, Commissioner, if I could, and it goes back to the chairman's comment. Again, going back to the definition of an ILEV being a building for live concerts, comedy, or theatrical performances, which the commission determines experience or is likely to experience a negative impact from the development or operation of a gaming establishment. Well, the only way there's a negative impact here is if ESE changes its historical programming to do something different,
Except for the
17
17
days.
days.
except for the date, run of the fair.
Which they've already said they'd make a commitment not to book during that time frame.
Correct.
Right.
So it's,
Well, yeah,
one could argue they're an ILEV for 17 days and not for 340, 50, whatever that works out to,
I mean,
or
but
the other way around.
that's my point, you know.
but one could also approach this from a different standpoint, couldn't one? And say, if MGM firmly commits to doing what it says it will do on pages 10 and 11, which is the not have any radius restrictions on any acts, do cross-marketing and promotion, and will block book entertainment acts in collaboration with other venues, and will not, I don't know whether this is on 10 or 11, and will not, and will sort of go into hibernation during the 16 days of the fair. What else could it do, reasonably, be expected to do? And say that if it commits to doing those things in an enforceable way, then we don't have to make the decision as to whether the ESE is an ILEV.
Well, Lyle said that he would add something like a 30-day window on either side of the 17 days.
Yeah.
So that's not been, so,
Well, no, I would agree. I think that would be the additional piece I would add, is that it's not just competing during the fair. If you're selling tickets to an entertainment event, the purchase process for that starts before the 17 days. So you want to make sure you're not competing with ESE's
Yeah.
entertainment run through
Right.
the event.
Right.
Probably longer period before than after. Maybe
Right.
it's 45 days before and 30 days after, but a significant buffer.
So there's one other matter in ESE's response to MGM's response or opposition. They raise a problem in the draft marketing agreement, the draft agreement. There's a clause that in the event that MGM fails to include a radius restriction exemption, ESE shall have no remedy. And that's on, let me read it. In the event that MGM fails to include such radius restriction exemption in any contract or otherwise inadvertently prohibits a performance in violation of this paragraph, MGM shall grant a waiver to such visiting performer or show at the written request of ESE. ESE shall not be entitled to any other remedy for breach of this section 2.2. So they're concerned that that
This
there's
is an
no
out.
teeth to the agreement. And this is a draft agreement that has not been agreed upon between the two parties, I should add.
But I don't understand what their concern is there. Because if on request, they in violation of the agreement, they put a radius restriction in there, because it's part of boilerplate, and ESE says, wait a minute, you got a radius, they approach the same performer and say, we want you to play, and the performer says, I can't do it because there's radius restriction, and they go to MGM and say, hey, you got a radius restriction in there, and MGM says, oh, that was a mistake, we'll take it out. Insofar as you're concerned, how are they harmed? I don't see how they can complain that there's no teeth in it.
Well, they don't, I guess they wouldn't necessarily know. I mean, if you sort of assume bad faith, that you could put them in there and just put pressure on the bit, people don't even bring them up, it just, they're in there, everybody knows, but nobody says anything about it. I mean, only if the vendor, if the act says, I can't come because there's a radius clause here, that's the only time Big E would have an opportunity to cure.
But if you, and you'd have to presume bad faith there, and if you're gonna presume bad faith, then that result can be reached even without a radius clause in it. They can, MGM, when they go to the performer, say, we'll book you here at an exorbitant sum, but you have to agree under the table that you're not gonna perform within a 90-mile radius of any place here, and just tell people you're booked or busy.
Right, but your question was, isn't the remedy that's in place enough? And for that problem, it wouldn't be. You'd want some ability to penalize in order to force good behavior.
Yeah, I get your point, and you're right, I wonder if, much as we need to decide this today, it seems to me that that the range of disagreement here is so small in all likelihood that I wonder if it isn't worthwhile having had this discussion to give these folks another week to talk about it before making a decision.
This is not a rhetorical question. What's the difference between that and determining that they are an ILEV so that they must now talk?
Well, that it's said and done by agreement, that we don't get into the, how can I characterize it, a downward spiral that leads to arbitration and doesn't break things out. They both have something to lose here, one way or the other, however we go on this ultimately. And if they have another week to say, well, we may lose, we may not lose, they both have something to lose, they may be able to reach an agreement because it seems to me the rational people would say they're so close together. Once we've declared them to be an ILEV, the sword of Damocles has fallen one way or the other, and positions harden and can harden, and it's not unusual for them to do it. And you're into some place where it's harder to reach an agreement. I mean, that's...
I don't know. I mean, it seems, does anybody have had thoughts about this?
Well, I'm fine with another week. I guess the way I was thinking about this was fundamentally this is a MGM could very easily withdraw its support or have not entered into its support of the other venues. I'm not suggesting that they would, but this is just emanating from their larger plan, which is this revitalization of downtown. So I know that may not be relevant to the topic exactly at this very minute, but
I think it is relevant. I think it is relevant. They're helping out other,
Right.
in
Maybe I
many
should.
ways they help themselves, but they help others at the same time.
That's-
And I think to presume bad faith is not helpful in this situation, and I would hope too with another week they could come to an agreement on their own.
What's the, just, I don't particularly feel strongly about it, but what's the difference if we just got through doing with Long Meadow? You know, we pretty much previewed the way we thought on Long Meadow. We had our consultants, and we could have said, you know, rather than force the process, the Long Meadow and the applicant had an opportunity to sort of see where we're going, to define the issues. Let's give them another week and save them the trouble.
We had recommendation from consultants that there was an impact, that there was additional information. I don't believe we have that here.
And I agree with Commissioner Cameron, and in addition, I think the issues in the Long Meadow case are much more complex. I frankly don't understand why these people haven't come to an agreement. It seems to me that the essence of the agreement is here. And as a rational, I don't want to say irrational, but I just think the essence of an agreement is here, and the dynamic will change dramatically regardless of which way we rule. And they both have something to gain, a lot to gain by reaching an agreement, and it seems to me a simple agreement to reach. And they both have a lot to lose, potentially, depending on how we rule ultimately. So it's a much simpler deal.
And perhaps to state the obvious, the commission at this point is divided as to how we would rule. And that should also give both applicants and petitioners a strong incentive to go back to it.
Commissioners, can I just add that between January 28th and today, it appears that the petitioner and the applicant did not meet or didn't have substantive discussions. And, you know, I wouldn't put it on any one party, but if if you are coming to a decision that they'll have one more week, maybe there could be a requirement that they get together.
Certainly is implicit. They don't draw that conclusion. Just one, we have meetings all next week, right? So we could stick this into an agenda item, so there's no problem with another meeting. And I assume a week isn't going to bump us, if worst case happens, an added week isn't going to bump us past May 31st, right? So we could have another week in it.
Mr. Chairman, regarding the Region A deferral, that is
No,
potentially
we've already,
ready.
yeah, right.
Put it past
Sorry,
that date.
past May 31st? Yike,
Yeah, I guess, right.
yike. Wow.
Yep.
Okay, so do we need a vote for this, or can we just sort of have a consensus to say, I'm fine with waiting if everybody wants to wait. Is anybody from Big E here?
Yeah.
Oh, you are, oh, okay, sorry, I didn't recognize you. So I guess everybody gets the gist, and you sort of see what we're thinking, and hopefully a week will be an opportunity to resolve this to everybody's satisfaction. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, now we get to item number 3. Does everyone want another break? Are we all right to finish up here?
What's that?
Hanover Theater, ILEV?
Oh,
Oh, is that resolved now?
Yes,
yeah.
we're complete.
This will just take a second, I
Oh,
think,
okay.
if I may.
I was on vacation,
Right.
Me too.
but you knew.
This petition is the opposite of the ones you've heard. We're asking, by mutual agreement of the parties, that the Hanover Theater be undesignated as an ILEV. The parties have entered into a cooperation agreement, and actually the agreement is between Cordish and the Massachusetts Performing Arts Coalition, not between Cordish and the Hanover Theater. So we'll call it a misunderstanding that led to the designation, and the parties both agree that the Hanover Theater should be undesignated relative to the Cordish application.
But wait,
Okay.
Attorney Grossman, wasn't there information in our packets about Hanover challenging or seeking ILEV designation from MGM?
This is category 2. This is a different application. They may be, I'm not sure what's going on with.
the MGM application.
Right, so that is a separate matter, and this is back to the Category 2 slots parlor designation from some
Correct.
time ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
But is Hanover in debate about whether it's an ILEV for Region B?
No, MPAC I believe they waived their ILEF's petition, or,
Whoops. There we
oh,
go.
thank you, and we have it right here.
There's an update.
A bulletin from the field.
Okay.
Some of the members.
Okay, so, yeah, writing to you today to report that with respect to one such petition on behalf of the Hanover Theater in connection with Blue Tarp redevelopment, the coalition has successfully negotiated and executed a live entertainment cooperation agreement with MGM. And the copy is attached here. That's a separate matter from this one.
Okay, so they're set for now, as far as we know, okay.
So they're doing it, basically doing everything through the coalition.
Yes, which is not in and of itself a venue, of course. It
No, no,
represents
No, no,
venues.
right, it's a representative.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So I
That's
guess,
great.
You need a simple motion to undesignate Hanover Theater
do we
as
have
a...
the authority to undesignate?
Well, I think it'll hold
Apparently
up.
we do.
We will in a minute.
Right. Okay, under that broad authority in Chapter 23A, do we have a motion?
I move that the commission is per the request, I guess, of the request coming from the coalition. Per,
Both parties.
And the applicant.
yeah, per the request of PPE and the Massachusetts Performing Arts Coalition, that the commission undesignate or de-designate the Hanover Theater in Worcester as an impacted live entertainment venue.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a broad new power. I
Yeah.
hadn't thought about it. It may have uses elsewhere. Undesignate.
Don't tell them what we might undesignate. All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.